Jasmine Crockett sat across from Bill Maher on Real-Time Friday night, prepared to discuss the recent violence in Minnesota that had dominated headlines. The riots following another police shooting had reignited debates about law enforcement and racial justice. Bill seemed eager to frame it as another example of progressive cities burning themselves down. Bill opened with his typical approach. He said, "Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett joins us tonight. Jasmine, Minneapolis is burning again. At what point do Democrats admit that their soft-on-crime policies are destroying cities?" Jasmine remained composed, having expected this framing. She said, "Bill, what's destroying cities is the same thing that's always destroyed them: poverty, injustice, and politicians who exploit pain for power. But that's not the whole story about Minnesota." Bill smirked. He said, "Oh, here we go? Let me guess. It's somehow Republicans' fault that a Democrat-run city can't control riots." The audience chuckled. This was the narrative they expected: Bill's reasonable liberal take criticizing progressive excess. Jasmine pulled out a folder. She said, "Actually, Bill, I have some interesting information about who's really behind the violence. Information that might surprise your audience." Bill leaned back dismissively. He said, "Please don't tell me you're going to blame outside agitators. That's what they always say when protests go bad." "Not outside agitators," Jasmine said calmly. "Inside orchestrators. With names, funding sources, and GOP connections." The panel guests, a conservative writer and a moderate Democrat, exchanged glances. This wasn't the usual talking point. Jasmine continued, "3 of the individuals arrested for arson in Minneapolis have direct ties to Patriot Front. 2 others are connected to militias that fundraise through Republican PACs. Would you like to see the arrest records?" Bill's smirk faltered slightly. He said, "Come on, there are always a few bad actors." "A few," Jasmine interrupted. "Bill, I have documentation showing coordinated efforts to infiltrate protests and incite violence. Telegram channels where right-wing groups explicitly discuss accelerating chaos in liberal cities. Want to guess who funds these groups?" The conservative panelist jumped in. He said, "This is conspiracy theory nonsense." Jasmine turned to him. She said, "Is it? Because I have the receipts. FEC filings showing dark money flowing from GOP donors to groups whose members just happened to show up in Minneapolis with gasoline and guns." She pulled out documents, spreading them on the desk. "Here's Matthew Coleman, arrested for throwing Molotov cocktails. Here's his social media celebrating the Proud Boys. Here's his donation history, all Republican candidates. Still think it's a conspiracy?" Bill tried to maintain control. He said, "Look, even if a few right-wingers." "A few." Jasmine's voice rose. "Bill, the FBI has identified over 40 individuals with right-wing affiliations arrested for violence in Minneapolis. 40. But somehow the story is still about Democrat cities burning." The moderate Democrat panelist attempted to mediate. She said, "Surely there's blame on both sides." "Both sides?" Jasmine laughed bitterly. "One side is protesting police killings. The other side is literally setting fires to make those protests look violent. These aren't equivalent." She pulled out her phone, showing footage. "Here's video from Minneapolis. See that man breaking windows? Local activists try to stop him. Guess what? He's a known 3%er. Has a Confederate flag tattoo. But when this airs on Fox News, he's just another BLM thug." Bill was getting frustrated. He said, "You can't seriously blame Republicans for every—" "I'm not blaming them for everything," Jasmine interrupted. "I'm blaming them for what they actually did, which is send provocateurs to turn protests into riots, which is fund groups dedicated to acceleration, which is exactly what happened in Minnesota." She stood up, energized now. "You want to know why cities burn, Bill? Because when people march peacefully for justice, infiltrators make sure it doesn't stay peaceful. Because chaos helps certain politicians. Because law and order campaigns need lawlessness to point at." The conservative panelist stood too. He said, "This is outrageous slander." "Slander?" Jasmine pulled out more papers. "Here's Kyle Rittenhouse 2.0. Brandon Lewis came from Texas to Minnesota with an AR-15 to protect property. ended up shooting 3 protesters. His GoFundMe? Promoted by Republican congressmen. His legal fund? GOP donors. Still slander. Bill tried to regain his footing. He said, but the majority of rioters. The majority of protesters were peaceful until your GOP friends' foot soldiers showed up. Jasmine was fully unleashed now. I have police reports, Bill. Officers saying the violence started with non-local agitators. Security footage showing known right-wing extremists breaking windows while protesters tried to stop them. She walked to the front of the stage, addressing the audience directly. This is the playbook. Create chaos, blame black people, win elections on fear. It happened in the 60s with CONTLPRO. It's happening now with Patriot Front. And hosts like Bill help by refusing to see the pattern. This is the moment mainstream media doesn't want you to see. When someone brings receipts that shatter the narrative. When documented evidence exposes how violence gets manufactured and blamed on the vulnerable. This is why independent voices matter. Because truth this explosive rarely makes it past studio editors. When someone risks everything to expose the real instigators, that's when you know the system is terrified. Bill's face was reddening. He said, "You're basically saying Republicans are running false flag operations." "I'm not basically saying anything," Jasmine shouted. "I'm explicitly saying that GOP-funded groups sent armed agitators to Minneapolis to turn protests into riots. I have names, dates, funding trails. This isn't theory, it's fact." The moderate panelist weakly offered, "But surely some of the violence was organic." Jasmine spun on her. "Organic? You know what's organic? Grief. Anger. Marching. You know what's not organic? Showing up with accelerants and zip ties. Coming from 3 states away with weapons. Having a Telegram channel called Light It Up funded by Republican dark money." She turned back to Bill. "You sit here every week blaming Democrats for violence in cities. But you never ask who benefits from that violence. Who needs it for their campaigns? Who funds groups dedicated to creating it?" Bill, defensive now, said, "This sounds like deflection." "Deflection?" Jasmine laughed. "Bill, I'm giving you documented evidence of right-wing infiltration and you're calling it deflection? What would you call it if Antifa was caught funding violence at Trump rallies?" "That's different," Bill started. "How?" Jasmine exploded. "How is it different? Because when black people's neighborhoods burn, it must be their fault. Because when protests turn violent, it can't possibly be the people who openly talk about race war and acceleration." She pulled out more documents, throwing them on Bill's desk. FBI reports on Boogaloo Bois infiltrating protests. Arrest records of Proud Boys with Molotov cocktails. Social media posts from militias bragging about making libs look bad. It's all here, Bill. But you'd rather blame the victims. The conservative panelist made a fatal error. He said, even if some right-wingers participated, the left created the environment. The environment. Jasmine's voice filled the studio. The environment of wanting cops to stop killing us. The environment of asking for justice? That environment? Or do you mean the environment where GOP politicians call protesters animals and thugs, while their donors fund the actual thugs? She walked back to Bill, standing over his desk. You know what creates environments for violence? Senators calling for protesters to be shot. Governors deploying military against citizens. Presidents saying, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. That's the environment, created by Republicans, exploited by their foot soldiers, blamed on Democrats. Bill tried once more. He said, you're painting with a broad brush. I'm painting with documented evidence. Jasmine pulled out her phone again. Here's the broad brush. GOP Representative Paul Gosar sharing fundraising links for arrested Proud Boys. GOP Representative Matt Gaetz calling arrested infiltrators patriots. GOP donors bailing out people caught with explosives at protests. Still too broad. Security started moving toward the stage. Bill noticed and seemed emboldened. He said, I think you need to calm down. Calm down. Jasmine laughed bitterly. Black neighborhoods are burning because of false flag operations, and you want me to calm down? People are dying because of manufactured violence, and you want me to be calm? No, Bill. Calm is how this keeps happening. Calm is complicity. She addressed the camera directly. America, they want you to believe cities burn because black people are violent, because progressives are radical, because Democrats can't govern. But I'm showing you proof that the violence is orchestrated by those who benefit from it. And they've been doing it for decades. Bill stood up. He said, "You need to leave." "Of course I do," Jasmine said. "Because showing evidence of right-wing violence on your show is apparently worse than committing it. Because exposing the real terrorists is more offensive than terrorism itself." Security approached her. She held up her hands. "I'll leave. But first, let every American watching know I offered evidence. Documents. Proof." And Bill Maher's response was to kick me off. Ask yourself why. Ask yourself what they don't want you to know. As security escorted her, she kept talking. Google Umbrella Man Minneapolis. Look up Proud Boys arrest records. Research GOP false flag protests. The truth is out there, but shows like this won't tell you. They profit from the lie. Bill shouted after her. "You're spreading conspiracy theories." Jasmine turned one last time at the exit. Conspiracy theories? "Bill, I brought FBI reports, arrest records, financial documents. You brought jokes and dismissal. America can judge who's telling the truth." Her final words before the door closed. When cities burn, ask who benefits. When violence erupts, follow the money. When they blame black people, look for white supremacists with matches. The truth isn't conspiracy. It's just hidden by those who profit from lies. The studio erupted in chaos. Half the audience was on their feet supporting Jasmine, the other half in shocked silence. The show cut to commercial immediately. When they returned, Bill tried to dismiss what happened as unhinged accusations, but the damage was done. The panel looked shell-shocked. The remaining segments fell flat. Within minutes, hashtag Jasmine exposes Joe P. went viral. People started sharing the documents she'd referenced. Independent journalists confirmed her claims. The arrest records were real. The funding trails were real. The infiltration was real. Major news outlets were forced to investigate. Within days, multiple stories confirmed right-wing groups had indeed infiltrated Minnesota protests. The narrative began to shift. Jasmine posted later, "I went on Bill Maher to discuss solutions. Instead, I had to expose how violence gets manufactured and blamed on its victims. They kicked me off for showing receipts." That tells you everything about whose side mainstream media is on. The video became one of the most shared political clips ever. Not because of the confrontation, but because of the evidence. Americans were shocked to learn about coordinated infiltration of protests. Bill's show faced massive backlash. His dismissal of documented evidence made him look complicit. His ratings dropped as viewers realized he'd rather protect a narrative than explore truth. Months later, congressional hearings were held on protest infiltration. Jasmine's real-time appearance was cited as the moment Americans learned the truth about manufactured violence. At those hearings, Jasmine said, "Bill Maher did us a favor. By kicking me off for presenting evidence, he showed America how mainstream media maintains lies. Sometimes getting thrown out is the most powerful statement you can make." The revolution wasn't in the argument. It was in the evidence they didn't want seen. It was in the truth they couldn't let stand. It was in proving that sometimes those who claim to seek truth are the most afraid of it. Especially when that truth exposes who really lights the matches and who really benefits from the flames.